with XI, I can clean that up. So it's just a pure, solid, say, organ matched up to the person's frequency. And that's where the organ starts to grow. Otherwise, it starts to, with people who've had organ transplants or who are about to have organ transplants. And I can give you a couple stories on that. They've, say, dramatically or drastically improved on their condition. One thing that the medical community, doesn't observe is that you have to ask why a person needs an organ transplant in the first place. There's something missing there. There's a key component, frequency. So even if you say replace that organ, it's just like replacing a part on a car. Why did that part go bad in the first place, right? Was there other mechanisms in play? And usually for those individuals, it's their genetic makeup obviously comes into play. How they see themselves, they usually are not, say, feeling complete, or they have a feeling of not being good enough. So the best way to feel not good enough is to have an organ that doesn't work well for you. So a piece of you have to be disconnected. So those are all, if you want to call them emotional, but they're not necessarily emotional or even psychological patterns. They are of your identity, your personal or your frequency identity. So that frequency identity isn't complete, therefore your body cannot be complete. And this is where even if you replace it with another organ, they won't feel complete. A lot of times they'll reject that organ because it's like, hey, this body or this frequency or this identity demands that I am not a complete identity. So even if you're giving me this organ, I'm going to reject it right off the bat for you. And this is where you have to take anti-rejection medications and so on like that, to keep supporting you. But psychologically, there's a lot of issues. And then this is why people who, have organ transplants, they don't live that long afterwards anyway, from studies. The reason why, again, is the main pattern of them feeling not complete. But actually, sometimes they might get even more and more depressed because they'll go, hey, you know what? I'm a complete person, but why don't I feel so complete anymore? So let me give you a scenario, and this will help you understand why people would reject, at a, say, physical level, okay, what your body does outside of, say, frequencies and so on like that, okay? Your organ is like a Bluetooth receiver, okay? So imagine that you are your phone, and then your organ is like a speaker. You're connected by Bluetooth. That Bluetooth has a specific address that goes to that, say, specific speaker. So your phone and only your phone will use that specific speaker. I give that speaker to somebody else. It's not going to work on their phone. It might be alive, it might be working well, but it's not going to be connected between the source and the speaker itself. So, and that's why there's a lot of decay in people who have organ transplants. The other aspect of it is that the more you move away from the source, the less frequency it connects, and then that's where it starts to die off. Just like a speaker, you move it far enough away. Usually, I think Bluetooth is about 500 feet. You move it far enough away, that Bluetooth speaker won't work for you anymore. That's exactly what I do. I read the personal, say, frequency signature, right, the source, and then match it up with the organ that they're getting transplanted. Now, there's not a lot of scientific research, but the people, I would say at least over a dozen individuals that I've done that with, who's had organ transplant, they're fine. I don't work with that many transplantees, but the people who I have worked on, they do amazing. By the way, they take less anti-rejection. They're happier overall because the underlying issues are gone. And then the Bluetooth component, the kidney or liver or whatever that they have, the heart, and themselves are connected. They have the same, say, passcode, for example. And the kidney goes, oh, I'm supposed to be connected to this source, not that source that probably died, right? That's because that's usually the case. So that's why, again, they live longer. They're a lot happier with less anti-rejection. And I can give you a couple stories. This one individual, I was reading her, and she was an older woman, and I'm going, oh my, it's like, do you party a lot? So it's like, no, I don't. It's like, wow, it's okay. And then it's like, do you take drugs? It's like, no, I don't take drugs or anything like that. She was a teacher of some modality. And I go, God, you feel like you're like three different people, when I see you and these stories don't match up. And then it dawned on her, well, she's had three different transplants. Okay. And I could just pick that up in her. So I was reading the three personalities that is literally taking over the woman's identity. And the reason why she came to me was she was getting like pulled into taking drugs, right? Or abusing herself. And she doesn't know why. Well, her kidney was from an 18-year-old girl who used to abuse herself and she died overdose. And I was reading that frequency or her storyline of, again, the person that had committed suicide, so to speak, or an OD in her frequency. So over time, she would literally turn into like a drug addicted individual. So I cleared that up for her. So those stories are in there, and you can go ahead and read it about people who've had organ transplants. There's stories about having dreams of the other person, whoever they got the organ transplant. Those are all there, and I think that's enough evidence to go, hey, you're not just taking somebody's organs, you're taking all their identity. It's not the brain memories, guys. And I keep telling you, in XI, it bypasses the brain. It's your DNA that holds all your memories, all your identities, and so on. It's in each and every cell of you. And that's one thing that the medical community does not seem to realize or don't want to realize. But with XI, I can clean that up. So it's just a pure, solid, say, organ matched up to the person's frequency. And that's where the organ starts to grow. Otherwise, it starts to decay. You'd have to understand is like, what's the purpose of you having to be in a situation because you're running a certain frequency that dictates that you have a transplant. So what is the underlying purpose or what is the underlying reason on why your life went towards that path? Right? I'm not saying it's your fault or anything, but there's obviously some kind of program or some kind of mapping, right, that dictates that this is going to happen to you. So you need to remove that. You know, the organ might not work out well for you. Or even if you did get the organ, the rest of your life is still the same. So you want to have a fresh start. Even, when we do studies on how effective my abilities are on human, the genome, the human DNA, I can pick up that vial, and it's just a tiny vial. I go, wow, there's lots of there's lots of there's a ton of people in here. I can feel their identities, and they go, oh no, the DNA has been washed and it's just been stripped of everything. It's like, no, it hasn't, because it's like I can feel. I go, there's a lot of women in here, and I go, well, where did you get the DNA? It's like from they scrape the lining of the pregnant women's uterus, when they're and they just put it all together. I can pick up that there's hundreds of women's like DNA within that small vial. So other things too. It's not just like organs, but if you're getting blood transfusions, blood is an organ in itself. You're not just picking up not just the diseases because they can clean that out, or even blood plasma. I've heard where blood plasma. I was working on this young man, and he had literally he felt like he had thousands of personalities in him, right? Yeah, and I'm going. I go, God, you feel like there's a ton of people in you, and then I go, well, how's your blood? And he goes, well, every so often, he gets blood plasma, and what they do in blood plasma is they clean everything out, but there's hundreds and hundreds of people's plasma all, commingled and then injected in him for his plasma. Well, they strip out that stuff they think sort of, but again, this goes into more, and science has to do more research on it. There's a deeper layer of identity that's in the memory of the DNA that they haven't stripped out. So what I did for him was literally strip out that identity and replace it with his identity. It worked for him. He felt like whole. He felt for the first time ever as once a being. Um, by the way, you know, you inherit your mom or your grandfather, mother's jewelry and so on like that. Their frequency is within. Obviously, with jewelry, it fades, your frequency comes in. But if you are a feeler type person, most likely their frequency will start to take over your frequency just by wearing that jewelry. Those things tend to fade away over time. But with genetic programming, items like organs, blood, hair, so on like that. Or, I don't know if you get somebody's eyes and so on like that. Those kind of things. Those are genetically coded. So, and they stay with that genetic coding, by the way, until you can say switch their IP address, if you will.